Now let's look at the qualitative information you can gather from the reading record to help you interpret oral reading behaviors and strategic actions. We'll learn how to analyze readers' errors and self-correction behaviors to see what kinds of information they are attending to and what kinds of information they are neglecting to use as they read. Reading is more than solving words. Readers use different sources of information while reading. As they learn more about reading, readers use information sources differently to work their way through the challenges of the text. There are 3 different sources of information that readers typically use to figure out a word. Meaning information is the message of the story and the ideas within it. Meaning is partially carried by pictures at the early levels. Structural information is the syntax of the language used in the text. Is it familiar, natural, literary, or a combination? How does a word fit into its grammatical context? Visual and phonological information is how the print looks on the page, including letters, clusters, words, spaces, and punctuation. Look at the recording form for the loose tooth. You will see 2 3-column sections beside the E and the SC rows that you already filled out when scoring Roberto and Olivia. These sections are for analyzing a reader's errors and self-corrections. In preparation for analysis, for each error the reader made, write M in the M column, S in the S column, and V in the V column. When you consider if the reader used meaning information when making the error, ask this question. Does the meaning or the message of the story have any impact on the error? Remember, meaning is often carried early on for the reader through the pictures. If so, it is marked on the recording form by circling the M in the M column of the error section. Later on, you may simply decide to put a check mark in the column rather than insert the letters and circle them. When you consider if the reader used structural or syntactical information when making the error, ask yourself this question. Does the structure or syntax of the sentence preceding the error influence the reader's response? In other words, would the error make sense grammatically? If so, circle the S in the S column of the error section. When you consider if the reader used visual information when making the error, ask this question. Does the printed text have visual similarity to the word the reader used as he read? It's important to look not only at the beginning of the word, but also at the interior and end of the word. If so, circle the V in the V column of the error section. Your goal is to develop a hypothesis about what led the reader to read one word for another. What might have made the reader say what he said? Let's move on to self-corrections. As readers learn more about reading, they become aware of the need to match their own ideas about a text with the printed information in the book, and they begin to notice mismatches and fix them, self-correcting their reading. When you analyze self-correction behaviors, again ask yourself what made the reader go back and fix each error rather than leaving it. As you ask that question, you might hypothesize that the reader used additional meaning, structural, or visual information. If possible, limit yourself to the one thing that most likely sent the reader back to check further. When you decide which of the 3 sources of information probably sent the reader back, circle the appropriate letter in the column for that source of information in the self-correction section. The other letters will remain uncircled. As you do this work, begin to look for patterns in the reader's ways of responding. You will notice that the errors offer information because the reader's attempts at words gives evidence of responses that are partially correct, not simply wrong. As patterns begin to emerge, you will see indications for next steps in instructing the reader. Now we'll return to Roberto's reading record for the loose tooth so you can try to analyze the errors and self-corrections he made. In addition to the recording form, you should have a copy of the book with you as you analyze the error and self-correction behavior. Some errors may be difficult to determine because you weren't sitting next to the student while he was reading, so look at how the reader has been responding thus far and make your best hypothesis. When you're working with your own students, this process will be much easier to determine as long as you remain open and don't fall into a pattern of response that is not based on actual observation. Resist the temptation to feel certain about what the reader did. Reading is a complex process. It's best to maintain a tentative stance when looking at reading records. Be open to surprises and new learning on the part of the reader. One thing to note when analyzing errors, don't bother to analyze insertions or omissions. They mostly have to do with language structure and meaning, so don't take the time to analyze them, but keep them in mind. In Roberto's reading of The Loose Tooth, his first error occurred on page 2 of the text, the for her. Reread up through the, but don't go any further. That's all the information you have to use, since that's as far as he got when he made the error. Would that error make sense in the story? Yes. Syntactically, could we use the for her in the sentence? Yes. Are there visual similarities between the two words? Yes. So for this error, circle M, S, and V. Now look at his next error, little for loose. Read the sentence through the error. Would that error make sense in the story? Yes. Syntactically, could we say little for loose there? Yes. Is there any visual similarity between little and loose? Yes. Again, for this error, you should circle M, S, and V. Continuing on page 2 of the text, and was read for but. Ask the questions. Circle M and S in the error column. Didn't for did not. Ask the questions. And circle M, S, and V for this error. Can for come. Ask yourself the questions. And for this error, circle V only. Mark each error according to the sources of information used in the E section. 6 offers his first self-correction. Look first at his error behavior. Kate brushed her teeth and for after. Ask the question. Circle M, S, and V for this error. The next error follows this one, and the sentence reads, Kate brushed her teeth and brushed for breakfast. Ask the questions. Circle M, S, and V for this error as well. Now the question is, why didn't he leave those errors? What led Roberto to go back and fix and for after and brushed for breakfast? Your response is a hypothesis only, especially in this situation where you really don't know this reader and you can't climb into his head. Perhaps he ran out of words before he's finished his thought. Perhaps he noticed that the correct letters were not present for the word brushed at the end. In both cases, Roberto was using the print or visual information to go back and self-correct, so circle V in the V column of the SC section for both self-corrections. Remember that your goal is to try to limit yourself to the one source of information that most likely sent Roberto back to reread the text.